right? Anyway, we're going to continue our series on dangerous doctrine. As you notice, a lot of the songs this morning are related to the theme of hope. And that's what I hope you get out of this message, is this whole feeling and this whole, encouragement to be hopeful about what's going on. I'm going to be talking about the end of the world because we've been talking about the end of the world for a long, long time. Woo! End time predictions. I believe end time predictions are actually dangerous to our faith, and we need to stop trying to predict the end of the world. You can see all the various dates there, end of the world expected by 30 AD, 60 AD, they just keep changing it, right? I think about it even in my own lifetime. I've lived through so many end time predictions. I can wear a little I'm a survivor of the end time, right? But I think I think we're focused on the wrong thing when we're focusing too much on end time predictions. I'm going to talk a little bit about them, where they came from. But, here's a little cartoon from one of my favorite cartoonists, David Hayward. He goes by the name Naked Pastor in all his cartoons, right? Jesus is coming soon, says the young man who turns into an older man. Jesus is coming soon. Who's there in hospice? Jesus is coming soon. And there's a sign on his grave, right? Because like me, this has happened. I can remember as a very young child being told that Jesus was coming very soon, that the rapture was imminent, that the return of Christ was any moment, and you better be ready. And here I am, a much older person, and I'm still being told the same thing. And I'm beginning to doubt that it's going to happen in my lifetime. The end is near. This is a passage. It's from Acts. I wanted to read it because I think it's kind of an interesting one. Then they gathered around him, which would be Jesus, and asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And he said to them, it is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witness in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And after this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid them from their sight. But they were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly two men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. Acts chapter 1, verses 6 through 11. So Jesus goes away, and he says, it's not for you to know the time, but I'll be back. And they're literally standing there. Okay, when? Is he coming back? How long has he been gone? Is it now? I don't know. God has to send two angels to go, why are you standing here? We're waiting for Jesus to come back. And it's like, no. He already told you what he wants you to do. He didn't tell you to stand here and wait. He didn't tell you to stand here and look at the sky. He told you to get out there and start spreading the news, to be his witness to Judea and further beyond all the way into Samaria. He didn't tell you to stand and look. He told you to go and do. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting verse. God has to kind of jumpstart everything with two angels going, stop waiting and get going. All right, here's a few predictions that were missed. Simon Bar Giora was the leader of a Jewish Essene sect of ascetics. They saw that the Jewish uprising against the Romans in 66 to 70 CE in Judea, that's when the temple would have been destroyed, as the final end-time battle, which would bring about the arrival of the Messiah. They believed that at the conclusion of that battle, Jesus would return. And so by the authority of Simon, coins were minted declaring the redemption of Israel. I'm sure they were a little surprised when Jesus did not return in 70 AD. Simon was wrong. Pope Sylvester II declared that in the year 1000, Jesus would return. People have this odd thing, weird superstitious beliefs about numbers, and every time there's like a millennial change, like from 1000 to 2000, for those of us who were around in 2000, remember all the craziness of 2000, that somehow the world is going to end. That's it, right? And so there was, again, millennial fever, but this time it was for the year 1000, and when it didn't show up in 1000, what do they normally do? They just changed the date. So he said, well, I guess it's going to be, 1033, because that'll be 1,000 years after Jesus' death. And so, that should do it. Right. Now, he was wrong again, so forget Pope Sylvester. Martin Luther believed that the end of the world would happen in 1600. Didn't happen. Cotton Mather, who is a huge influence on American religion, right? Very prominent Puritan minister, came, up in that New England area, a lot of influence. He took 3 guesses at it. He guessed 1697, 1716, and 1736, and was wrong all 3 times. So, no, Jesus did not return in any of those years. I think this one's my personal favorite. Joanna Southcott. I mentioned her age, that she was 64 at the time that she made this prophecy. She was a self-proclaimed prophetess, and she claimed at the age of 64 that she was pregnant with Jesus, and that Jesus would be born on October 19th, 1814. And on October 19th, 1814, they somehow figured out she wasn't even pregnant. At age 64, I probably could have guessed that and just played the statistics. John Wesley, for those of you who don't know John Wesley, one of the co-founders of Methodism, which has a huge impact upon American religion, right? Most of everything we do nowadays flows from Methodism. The entire Pentecostal charismatic movement came out of Methodism. Almost everything we do relates to Methodism in some way. Huge impact upon American Christianity. He guessed 1836 in his writings. He said that the Antichrist had already been born and was living in America today. And he was wrong. Over and over again, we keep seeing these predictions. Every generation believes that they are the terminal generation, that Jesus is going to come back in their particular lifetime. And every one of them has been wrong. And it keeps getting crazier. William Miller, who was the founder of a group called the Millerites, believed that Jesus would come back. And what happened in 1844 is an event known as the Great Disappointment. It was based upon a certain prophecy of Daniel 8, the 2,300-day prophecy, where for some unknown reason he decided that one day equals a year. And a lot of times if you read a lot of these prophetic books, we'll see this over and over again, that a day equals a year. And there's no particular reason to pick that. It's completely arbitrary. There's no evidence that there's any kind of biblical interpretative method that says a day equals a year. They just pick it. And because of doing this, he did some fancy math. There's this little chart. He did some fancy math, and he decided that Jesus would come back in 1844. And he had 2 chances at it. He missed it both times in 1844. And he is now responsible for several other movements that grew up from him. Because when you fail, you always have to make an excuse or change the date or something like that. He tried changing the date. It didn't work. When it failed the second time during the Great Disappointment, it was decided, a new group emerged that said, well, Jesus really did sort of come back. You just didn't see it. And they became known as the Seventh-day Adventist. So that's where the Seventh-day Adventists came from. The Jehovah's Witnesses come out of this particular group. Okay? And also the Baha'i faith comes out of this group. The Baha'i movement claims that Jesus did come back in 1844. They will show you a picture of him and say, this was him, and this is what he taught, and you need to follow it. So we have at least 3 major groups that come out of the Great Disappointment here by doing his fancy math. I never trust anybody who's got fancy math that revolves around dates and stuff like that. Here's the first reason why. I'm like, well, which calendar are you using? Are you using the Hebrew calendar? Are you using the Julian calendar when a lot of these things were written? Were you using our current Gregorian calendar? Which one? Because a lot of the dates are just kind of arbitrary, and we messed them up anyway when we changed over. No big deal. So why do we have so many people who like to predict this stuff? Why are we so focused on all of this end-time prediction? Why are we all writing books and selling DVDs and getting everybody all worked up that Jesus could come back? Why? Because we have this desire to know. I mean, don't we want to know what's going to happen next? Wouldn't it be great if we really could predict the future? Wouldn't it be great if we could just open up the Bible, look at a verse, and go, oh, look right there. Now I know what's going to happen. Now I know what to invest in, or now I know when to sell off my investments, right? Should I do that long-term investment? No, I don't think so, right? Because the world's going to end next year, so sell short. You know. But I think there's another reason, too. There's a particular psychological effect. It's known as pareidolia. Anybody familiar with this? Our brain, and this is a psychological effect, our brain is an amazing, amazing thing. Our brain does stuff, makes these amazing leaps of intuition that doesn't happen with other animals. We find patterns even when there aren't patterns. See, our brain is amazing at finding patterns, and that helps us move on to make like these intuitive leaps in knowledge. And so we can solve problems because we're able to do this. We're able to see patterns that maybe others can't see. But it also works against us because we see patterns where there are no patterns. That's why when you lay down, you might remember doing this as a kid, right? You lay down on the grass. Not any of our modern kids, right? Because they're bubble wrapped and dipped in hand sanitizer before we send them out, okay? Can't get them outside in the grass. They're going to get all, allergy and stuff, right? Okay, anyway, right? Extra sunscreen. Maybe you remember as a kid, you older folks in the crowd, laying in the grass, and you looked up at the sky, and you're looking at the little clouds going by, and you're like, ooh, that one looks like a bunny. That one looks like Superman. That one looks like Cotton Mather screaming at his congregation. That was me as a kid, right? I'm like, yeah, that one definitely looks like Cotton Mather. That's pareidolia. Your brain is imposing order. Your brain is imposing a pattern on just chaos. And so oftentimes we see patterns where there aren't patterns. And this is also why we have a lot of conspiracy theories. Where do they come up with this stuff? They begin connecting things that don't necessarily go together. Our brain likes order. Our brain likes patterns, and so it creates them where they aren't even there. And I think that's one of the reasons why we get a lot of this stuff. Now, in my particular lifetime, we were talking with Gage this morning. He's like, how old are you really? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you. I don't tell any of my students how old I am. I just, I lie about it all the time. In my last sign class, I had somebody say, well, now how old are you? I said, well, let's just put it this way. I think I look pretty good for 75. And that kid went, wow, you really do. I'm like, oh, you're not going to pass this class. But in my lifetime, and especially in the 70s, and I've been wondering for a long time, why did a lot of this stuff hit in the 70s? What was going on in the 70s? Well, if you're familiar with American history, we call that the supernatural 70s, where we suddenly had this huge interest in supernatural phenomenon. So this is that time when we got Rosemary's Baby in 1969, followed by The Exorcist, and that really kicked a lot of stuff up, right? Kind of the supernatural 70s. And the late 60s, early 70s was a time of great cultural upheaval, so I think they were looking for something to blame for all the cultural upheaval, and so they went supernatural. It must be the devil or something like that. But in my lifetime, they got really fascinated with end times. And I think being able to say, well, this is going to happen, gave them a sense of control and a sense of order. But more than that, I think because of all the cultural chaos that was going on in the late 60s and the early 70s, they're like, this has got to be the end. This must be the great, the world can't get much worse than this, so Jesus has got to hurry up and come back. But no, it's not. But I think that's part of why. But this is the book that helped kind of kick off a lot of it, the late, great Planet Earth, okay? And it's oftentimes attributed to Hal Lindsey. He became sort of the face of biblical prophecy in the 70s. The reality is he didn't write the book. It was written by his ghostwriter, C.C. Carlson. She finally gets credit on most of the books now. They began adding her name to the books. The reason that she didn't get credit for it was because she was a woman. And a woman can't be an expert in biblical prophecy. That's for men, right? So Hal Lindsey got credit for it. He became the person on there. A couple of interesting things about this book. He predicted that the late great Planet Earth, that the world would end sometime in the 80s. In fact, he was predicting that the world would end in 1988 and the rapture would happen in 1981. He'd also named the Antichrist. Anybody know who the Antichrist was in 1970? Anwar Sadat. Hey, here's his follow book, the 1980s Countdown to Armageddon. And again, he began to reinforce that the world should be over by 1988. That should be the end of it. Although he kind of moved, because he missed the 1981 rapture, he sort of moved the rapture to 1988 instead of the end of the world. And that, that's when it was all going to happen. Equally wrong, but not wanting to miss a good chance to sell a book, he joined in with everybody else in the year 2000, right? Because we all know the whole world was going to end in the year 2000, the Y2K crisis. Anybody remember the Y2K crisis? Ah, the craziness. I have a friend who to this day, his parents still have a basement full of prepper supplies for Y2K. They bought that much. I'm like, are you crazy, right? Supposedly all the computers were going to crash and everything. We're all going to die. But that, again, that kind of millennial fever that kind of comes along, they were predicting that the rapture would happen then, that the world was going to end in 2008, and that the rapture should happen sometime in late 2000 or early 2001, and the world would end by 2008. And you might be wondering, how in the world do they pick these dates? Well, they take one verse of the Bible out of context, and they apply it to sort of biblical prophecy. The big event that happened was 1948. Israel regains territory and is acknowledged as a nation again. And for a lot of these prophecy prognosticators, they've picked that as, that's the start of the prophetic time clock. And so they took one verse about coming back in a generation, and they proclaimed that a generation, a biblical generation, is 40 years. So 40 years from 1948 is 1988. So the rapture's got to happen in 1981, so Jesus can come back in 1988. Oh, well, never mind, we'll start it, right? And they begin moving all this kind of stuff. Well, in his Facing the Millennial Midnight, he decided that, oh, you know what? Maybe a generation isn't 40 years. Maybe it's 50 years or 60 years. Currently, Howell says that a generation is 70 years. And I think that gives him some time until 18 or so? So he's missed that one, so I'm sure he's going to revise it. Let's see. Ah, yes. Famous book, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Be in 1988. And it'll happen on Rosh Hashanah. And this book kind of kicked off the whole, it's all related to the Jewish calendar. And you have to pick one of the festivals of the Jewish calendar when things are going to happen. That the Jewish calendar of festivals represent all these major events that happen. You got to follow the Jewish calendar. And so this guy wrote his book, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. Thousands of these books were sold. They discussed this on TBN, Trinity Broadcasting Network. They discussed it on with Pat Robertson. He had it on. Jim and Tammy had him on. Paul and Jan Crouch had him on, right? And in fact, Paul and Jan actually had a rapture countdown. You can find it on YouTube if you look, as they're prepping for Rosh Hashanah of 1988. Of course, it came and went. That's why the very next year, the author of this book published 89 Reasons the Rapture Will Happen in 1989. Followed by the book, 90 Reasons the Rapture Will Happen. Yes. So he finally died and stopped writing books. So this is something I particularly remember, 1992. And the reason I remember it is because this is a movement that came out of Korea. This was a Korean rapture cult that came out. And a lot of people were, especially in Korea, were definitely hurt by it. They sold all their possessions. There were some murders and suicides and things like that in preparation for this. But the reason that I remember this is because standing on the corner on my way to work, standing on the corner of Beach Boulevard with the intersection of Beach and Ettinger, right there where the freeway's at, freeway on-ramp on my way to Golden West College, was a Korean gentleman who stood out there every day with signs and flags and literature trying to get people to understand that the rapture was going to happen on October 28th, 1992. It was based upon the word of a child prophet in Korea. Hurt a lot of people. 1992 came and went. It was devastating to the people who were following this. It was like another great disappointment all over again. They're like, how could we have believed this? We sold everything that we had, and yet we did it. Here's the most current one, 4 blood moons. This was John Hagee and Mike Blitz. Hagee made a fortune off of this one. He came up with, there's this astronomical phenomenon that happens called a blood moon. Nobody called lunar eclipses blood moons until Hagee did. If you notice that during a blood moon, the color of the moon changes. It can be anywhere from kind of a golden color to almost a crimson color and all kinds of shades in between. But he decided they were blood moons, and that when 4 of them happen in a certain time period, that's called a tetrad. And that always marks something important that God's just about to do. And he sold this. He sold this idea. For John Hagee, he believed the world was going to end in 2015. Wait, I need to fix that statement. He didn't believe that, but he wrote about it. He sold a book and DVDs, did all kinds of conferences on it, made millions off of this. Why don't I think John Hagee actually believed that the world was going to end in 2015 as his book supposedly prophesied? Because if you look at his church calendar available on his website, in 2016 he was planning a picnic where he was going to be a guest speaker, including games for the kids. How? The mystery of the Shemitah. Sounds great, doesn't it? Again, this is that whole Jewish calendar thing. Anybody know what a Shemitah is? It's every 7th year on the Jewish calendar. Every 7th year is a sabbatical year. And according to this particular author, Jonathan Cahn, every 7th year, significant things happen. God uses this 7th year, this Sabbath year, to move the prophetic clock forward, and amazing things happen on it. Not really. I have a lot of problems with Jonathan Cahn and his 7-year cycle. See, I mean, let's face it, if you're on a 7-year cycle and you're saying every 7 years something happens, trust me, just by random chance, something's going to happen every 7th year. That's sort of important. And to make it kind of stretch it out a little bit, he says, well, there's sort of the pre-Shemitah and the post-Shemitah. So it can be anywhere between a year before and a year after. So if you get a 3-year period every 7 years, something's bound to happen, right? Anyway. Let me talk about lying for profit. And I believe that's what these people are doing. They are literally lying for profit. John Hagee has a habit of fudging dates to make them line up with these supposed tetrads. He says in 1493, during one of these tetrads, that was the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. There was a tetrad, supposedly 4 lunar eclipses that happened in a short time period, right? That happened in 1493, and he said that was the expulsion of Jews from Spain. Where are my history majors? Any? Anybody know what year the Jews were expelled from Spain? It was 1492. A total year off. So in other words, they were thrown out of Spain, and a year later there was a tetrad. So apparently God either read the wrong calendar or he's just really bad at sending out signs. He's like, sorry, late. Here, four blood moons, right? Let them up. Totally wrong by a year. 1949, the establishment of Israel. History majors? 1948. Oh, well, they became it, but there were like some paperwork that they signed that year. Okay, right? So he has a tendency to just say, well, it's close. In fact, in his later book and his revision, he writes, well, if it happens within a year or 2 years of the tetrad, that counts. I'm like, no, it doesn't. That's like, oh, look, something significant just happened. Bing, 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 I predicted it. I don't think so. In 162 CE, 795, 842, and 860, there were also tetrads. And guess what? Nothing happened. Nothing. So more times than not, nothing happens, then something happens. So just by random chance, you can just go, well, yeah, I'll pick that one. And if you're able to jump a year before or a year after, you're going to find something. Here's an interesting question. What happened in 70 CE? The destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Now, you'd think if God were sending out some signs, if God's going to be like, oh, I need to send a significant portent, that in 69 CE we would have gotten a blood moon tetrad. Did we? Nope. Did we get one in 70? Nope. 71? Nope. And that's one of the most significant events in Jewish history, and nothing happened. Nothing. So I have a hard time buying into this blood moon nonsense. It's just like, here's some unusual astronomical phenomenon. Let's just see if anything happened during that time. Oh, look, I can pick this one or that one, or it's close, good enough. And he made millions on this. Ticks me off. Khan, 1994, there was a Shemitah year. Here was the most significant event that he could find, that Yasser Arafat returns to Palestine. Anybody know what happened after he did that? Nothing. He was just traveling. Okay, if that's the most significant thing you can find. Matthew 7, verses 15 through 23. Watch out for false prophets. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. You know, my friends and I, we used to discuss a lot of these televangelists and a lot of these frauds and stuff like that. And we had a saying. This is what we used to say. The reason that there are all these fraudsters and hucksters and con men and false prophets is because sheep need to be sheared. And these people understand that. Don't be a stupid sheep. By their fruit you will recognize them. By their fruit you will recognize them. Trust me. If they are predicting the end of the world within a year and they still have their jet and their multi-million-dollar mansion and their savings account and they are planning a picnic with games for children to be the guest speaker at it, that's their fruit. You should be able to go, I'm not buying it. If I knew I were going to die in a year, if I knew that the world was going to end in a year and I really knew it and I really believed it, I'd be maxing out my credit cards and having a good time. I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be on another cruise ship somewhere in the really good room. Ordering room, yeah, more champagne, more champagne. No, don't worry. Yeah, of course I can pay for this. I'm on like an installment plan, aren't I? Just by their fruits you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? This is just saying they act according to their nature. They're con men. Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. The nature of the tree produces the fruit. The nature of the person standing in the pulpit will produce fruit as well. And all they produce is fear and profit. Those are the two things they produce. That's their fruit. Fear and profit. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Do you think the will of the Father is to predict dates? No, the will of the Father is to do what? To love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul and all thy mind. And to love your neighbor as yourself. Selling books and DVDs and book and DVD combos and special conferences and all that other stuff that goes with it to take their money is not loving your neighbor. Many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Drive out demons in your name, perform many miracles? And then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. There are going to be a lot of people that Jesus is going to denounce. You're not a prophet. You may have prophesied my name, but I don't know who you are. So what's the danger of all this end time prediction nonsense? And I really think trying to predict the end times is dangerous to us. Ideas have consequences. One, it changes our focus. We start living in a future time and forget about the here and the now. We start trying to predict dates, and we start trying to prove it. And we get into all kinds of meaningless arguments. Well, do you think it's a pre-tribulational rapture, a mid-tribulational rapture, a post-tribulational rapture? I got a dozen books on that subject. And the reality is there is no rapture. What do you think it is? And we get all caught up in all this stuff that doesn't matter, and we forget living here and now, loving our neighbor. I'm so busy adding and subtracting the number of Shemitah years divided by disciples, add in 70 weeks from Daniel, subtract, 1 week over here, and here's a Roman Empire and the founding of Persia. I'm too busy doing math, but I forget to visit somebody in the hospital. I'm so busy putting together my next book and DVD combo that I forget that there are a lot of people who just need basic necessities. And it changes our focus. We're no longer living in the here and now. It increases fear. Fear helps sell things. Anxiety helps sell things. This is create a problem, here's a solution. And it just increases fear. And how many times throughout the Bible does it say, fear not? Fear not. Jesus didn't tell us about the end of the world to make us afraid. The book of Revelation was not written to make us afraid. It was a book of hope. And it was supposed to give us hope. And this steals our hope. And it discredits the church. How many wrong predictions does it take before people go, these people don't know what they're talking about? How many times can I be wrong before people walk away from the church? All right, I'll do it. Are we ready? I am the great and mighty prophet R.C. I shall prophesy the future for you. Wait, I see it now. I see that the Middle East will become increasingly troubled and distressed. There will be more strife and discord in the Middle East. Mark my words, within a year this will happen. Wait, I'll get even more specific. I predict that within a year, a rocket will be shot at Israel. Guaranteed. As the Bible says, there shall be an increase in wars and earthquakes. I predict that California will have at least 100 earthquakes within the next year. Mark my word. Go ahead, write it down. Oh, this is on video, right? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. I know it's going to happen because it happens every year. Me predicting instability in the Middle East is like predicting Wednesday will follow Tuesday. It just happens. Me predicting a rocket will fall on Israel in the next year, you're like, that's pretty bold. No, they have one shot at them every week. We just don't report on it. And as for earthquakes in California, 100 earthquakes in a year, we have 100 earthquakes in a month. We just don't feel most of them. Mark my word, I'm a great prophet. Don't forget to buy my book and DVD when it comes out. And at least I'm right about this stuff, right? I'm not making up stuff that's wrong. Now watch, no rockets are going to fall for a year. I just know it. How do we live this out? What should we really be doing? How about focus on the here and the now? I don't know what's wrong with churches across America. They're all going back to, well, in the old days, in the glory days of the church. When were the glory days of the church? The first century? They faced their own unique problems during that time. They faced their own unique problems during that time. They didn't look back to the past or towards the future. They dealt with the issues of then. Protestant Reformation, they had to deal with the issues then. We're not to live in the past. We're not to live in the future. We're to deal with the issues here and now. There's a lot that needs to be accomplished here and now. Focus on now. Focus on what you need to be doing here and now to live out God's word. How about just make the world a better place? I saw this cartoon and scrolled by it on Facebook. And it's this guy at a conference. It's this big conference. It's a conference on climate change. And the guy stands up and goes, well, wait a minute. What if all this climate change is a hoax and we make the world a better place for nothing? You can't go wrong by making the world a better place. I think it's insanity that we have certain religious groups who are like, go ahead and destroy the environment. Jesus is coming back soon. He's all going to remake it. That's insanity. Go ahead and make this world a better place. Be good stewards of it. And prophecy is for hope, and we keep turning it into fear. During the Great Awakening in this country, we began to push a preaching style of fear. Sinners in the hands of an angry God. You better be afraid because God's going to burn you. Turn or burn came about that time. And in the 70s, well, nobody's thinking about hell anymore, so, you're going to get left behind. And we we push this idea of fear to get people to come down the aisle and commit their life to Jesus. That's not a commitment to Jesus, that's a commitment to an insurance policy. I would much rather that we give the hope of the world being a better place because we follow the will and teaching of Jesus. That we begin to show Christianity as a beautiful light upon a hill to attract people to, and that they commit to it because it's so beautiful, not because they're afraid of what will happen to them. Prophecy calls us to repentance and offers us hope. And that's what we need to live out. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. God is a God of hope, not a God of fear. Fear not. Harold Camping. That crazy old crackpot. And it's easy to dismiss him as a crazy old crackpot, but his prophetic preaching had real world consequences. This is not just like, oh, well, he missed a few dates. No, it had real world consequences. A Palmdale mother has been arrested on suspicion of attempting to kill her daughters because she believed the tribulation, a worldwide period of wars, epidemics, and natural disasters before Jesus returned to earth, was about to occur, and she didn't want the girls to suffer through it, sheriff's officials said. This was printed in a newspaper 2 days after camping proclaimed the end of the world. She murdered her children because she bought into this nonsense. Julian McCreary, a Texas mother, killed her 6-year-old son in Maine. When she was arrested, she was sitting in her truck reading a Bible. She sacrificed her son in preparation for the rapture, which is predicted for Saturday, May 21st, 2011. Again, Harold Camping predicted the rapture, right? May 21st, 2011. She believed that her 6-year-old son would not be raptured. And so she killed him so he wouldn't have to go through this horrible tribulation. These are children being killed. Now, I will freely admit that these are probably very unstable individuals who did this. They were probably mentally ill. But this kind of nonsense attracts the mentally ill and gets them to do terrible and awful things. How about this one? A 14-year-old girl named Natasha Zakinova hanged herself out of fear of Harold Camping's predictions on May 21st, 2011. She chose death rather than to be among the ones suffering on earth after the rapture. Suicide. Out of fear. The New York Post on May 13th, 2011 issue ran an article on an engineer who has wasted more than $140,000, which was, by his way, his life savings, into advertising the May 21st, 2011 Harold Camping false prophecy. Here's a man who spent his entire life savings, went into financial ruin because he believed it. Murders, suicides, financial ruin. This is the fruit that is produced from this nonsense. So I have no problem saying it's coming from a bad tree. If this is the fruit it produces, this is the bad tree it's coming from. All this end-time nonsense. Stop trying to predict the end of the world. When's the end of the world going to be? When it happens. And you don't need to predict it. You need to focus on living here and now. In the Bible, there is a parable of the 10 virgins. It talks about they're waiting for the bridegroom to come back. And as they wait outside, some of them, it gets later and later and later, and night comes, and some of them don't have oil for their lamps because they weren't ready. So they go off to go buy oil, and the bridegroom comes back, and they all go in, except for the 5 who didn't have oil because they missed the event. Notice that the parable is not about predicting when the bridegroom will come back. It's just be ready for whenever the bridegroom comes back. We need to be focusing on the here and now, always ready, no matter what. As long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're going to be good. You got a choice. Are you going to choose hope? Are you going to choose to live in a state of hope? Or are you going to choose to live in fear? Because that's really what this is all about. How are you going to live out your Christianity? A hopeful Christianity or a fearful Christianity? And I choose hope. Again, you can contact us if you'd like to discuss this message more.